This show has been brought to you in part by Bogart Extractors, an industry leader in hydrocarbon extraction. Over the last decade, Bogart has implemented many new technologies which have helped to revolutionize the way hydrocarbon extractions are performed. Each unit is made from sanitary stainless steel and is built and tested right here in the USA. Their certified systems for use in licensed facilities meet all NFPA and ASME standards and undergo peer review by a third-party engineer to ensure your facility and its employees can operate safely. Beyond simply making a functional extractor, Bogart has many additional features which make extraction using one of their machines a faster and more cost-effective process than would be possible on comparable machines from other manufacturers. These features include hydrocarbon falling films to supercharge evaporation rates, heavy-duty explosion-proof pumps for flammable liquid or vapor, industrial chillers capable of maintaining large tanks of solvent at temperatures well below negative 60 degrees centigrade, and more. Bogart can also offer extensive tech support and consultation services. Whether you need to set up an extraction lab from scratch or just need some replacement gaskets, give Bogart a call at 855-553-3887 or check out the website at www.bogart.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. I'm Larry Mishkin of Mishkin Law in Chicago, and I am joined today, as always, by my co-host, Rob Hunt of Linnae Holdings. Rob is out in San Diego, where actually I will be in about a week, escaping this miserable weather we're having in Chicago. One more snow dump on the way, but then I get to head for the West Coast for a few days. So, Rob, how are you doing?
I'm really good. I'm super fired up about today's show because I love the show we're going to cover, and lots happening in the cannabis world this week too, so this should be a lot of fun today.
Absolutely. And in addition to our news and great Grateful Dead talk, we are also joined today by a really good guest who we're excited to have with us, Scott Berman of the Panther Opportunity Fund, which is a vintage cannabis-focused venture capital fund with a complementary and diverse set of 14 portfolio companies. And we will be introducing Scott in a moment as well and talk with him about that, as well as Grateful Dead talk, because Scott is, like all of us, a deadhead, and that just makes it more fun for us. So, Scott, welcome to our show, and we look forward to speaking with you shortly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Rob, news, what's going on in the cannabis world?
Wow, lots of stuff. Let's start with LA County switching the Board of County Supervisors and kind of what they're thinking about in terms of opening up the market a little bit. So people in California don't really understand that when they think that California is a legal adult use state, they forget that that only is dependent on where you are in the state, and different pockets are legal and different pockets are not. So even though the city of LA is legal for adult use, the county of LA means that the incorporated cities within the county can make their own self-determination on how they want to handle it, but the unincorporated part of the county is handled by a board of county supervisors. Previously, those guys were against cannabis. As of yesterday or today, they are for it, which means there's going to be a whole new wave of license applications opening up and potentially 25 more dispensaries opening up in unincorporated LA County, with preference being given to equity applicants, which, again, as we all know, creates all sorts of new issues, because then the question is, how do non-equity applicants game the system and find straw man equity applicants to, sort of front the organization, which is never the intent of these rules to start with, but it appears to be what everyone's doing.
Welcome to the cannabis world, huh?
That's just one more way to look. People are always sneaky and always find out ways to do things the way they want, but very few states, as we've discussed before, have really thought about equity from the right perspective, which is if we're going to empower these guys to be cannabis operators, then we should also create a fund that finances them. I always look at it the same way I look at TARP. Initially you might put some money up, but ultimately it should make the money back for the state. And if you want to approach it that way, then I think it'd be a great thing for everyone. If not, this is just backdoor ways to give licenses to others using some sort of a straw man as a front person.
So I have to tell you, though, Rob, this sounds a whole hell of a lot like Chicago politics, how they managed to pull that switch at the commissioner level.
The way California works, it all depends on whatever the most recent election cycle was. So, for instance, I'm in San Diego County. Previously, San Diego County, it was 3-2 against cannabis at the Board of County Supervisors level. In the last election, it became 4-1 in favor. So whatever we're seeing in LA, expect to see San Diego follow suit really soon. So it's not surprising. It's just a question of how long it takes after people are brought into the board. And once they are, then they go through their priority list. And I think for this one, cannabis took about 6 months after the last election. And here we go. You're going to see it change. It could always change back the other way. If it does, that board could sunset whatever the last group did. But normally if they sunset it, it's 5 or 6 years where, they give these groups to operate, so they don't have to close down right away. And if they do that, then very likely there's a change of composition again before that, which is very similar to what you saw in Illinois when, Rauner took over. So it's not a huge difference that, different people can see things different ways, but they can't just immediately turn the clock back and stop it. They've got to give a period of sort of transition. So, other counties very well may follow. It just depends on how conservative the county is. I think the rule of thumb in California is the further away from the coast you get, and the further north you get, the more conservative it is. But I think you'll see unincorporated San Diego County open up soon. I think unincorporated Orange County will follow suit soon. But LA is the first one to go, and it's big news. That adds a lot of new territory to legal cannabis in California.
Wow. Okay. Well, very interesting. And as I said, I'm going to be out in Southern California this coming week, so I will have to poke my nose around a little bit and see what's going on out there. It's always a fun place.
Just got to poke around, Larry.
Just got to poke around, no doubt about it. Now, here's something that, almost seems like it should have happened ages ago, but the NFL is finally starting to come around a little bit on cannabis. And whereas, in the past, a number of star players have wound up missing games because of testing positive for cannabis, notwithstanding all the studies that are showing that cannabis is great for pain relief and better than all the opioids that the league puts them on. So it comes as a little bit of a surprise that this last week, the NFL announced that it's going to award $1 million to medical researchers at the University of California in San Diego and to the University of Regina up in Canada to investigate the effects of cannabinoids on pain management and neuroprotections from concussion. And they're hoping that it may lead to the discovery of some evidence that could impact pain management for the players. And this is coming from Dr. Alan Sills, who's the NFL's chief medical officer, and indicating that the league is going to start focusing on this now and move away from punishing players and seeing if there's not a way that perhaps cannabis consumption, certainly within moderation, I'm sure, but could hopefully be a non-opioid, if you will, source of pain medication that a lot of the players who already have used it in the past for that and have adapted to it and are familiar with it, sounds like a number of them might really like it too. But it just represents a big move, right? The NFL has had a lot of image problems the last couple of years, especially with the Colin Kaepernick stuff and, being a step or two behind the times and not being really receptive to the fact that it's a league whose players are, in large majority black. And, it's often been seen as a lack of concern for these players and for other players and really anyone as a whole. And, now here's the NFL doing this. They're huge, they're gigantic. Everybody knows the NFL. And, the impact that this could have on the medical use of cannabis at many different levels is really, really huge. What do you think about that, Rob?
First I think, newsflash, Roger Goodell, cannabis is not a performance-enhancing drug. So, once you sort of start with the baseline of, this isn't gaming a system that, allows you to perform like a Russian figure skater, you're probably okay, right? So, on that side of it, Goodell can go back to the agita he currently has over people taking knees protesting racial disparity. So, it's a good move for the NFL. It's a good image move for the NFL. I'd expect hockey's going to, probably follow suit. Look, basketball's been pretty good pro-cannabis for a long time. I'm sure Scott can speak to that in a little bit, but you look back to the 1970s, and I think the vast majority of players were using cannabis back then, and nothing's really changed. So it's if the sports leagues can actually come out, and especially the NFL and the NHL, where concussions are a major issue, then I think that it's a very it's going to bring a lot of positive optics to the potential benefit of cannabinoids.
Yeah, I think so. And my understanding is that the Pittsburgh Steelers were really way out ahead of the game on this, and that one of their medical trainers had experience with medical cannabis and brought it to the attention of the Steelers, non-THC, I'm sure, to avoid potential drug test detections, but trying to incorporate CBD into the regimen of players to help with concussion situations. So, it's great when one team is willing to step out and take that risk. It's even better, I think, when the league as a whole is willing to do it. So, that'll be great, and certainly we'll see what happens with that, and something to keep an eye on. And I'm sure the players will be very happy about it, and it won't before long. I guess I'll tell you what's really funny about this is last week on Bill Maher, he had Ricky Williams, and they were talking about how Ricky Williams' football career came to an end because he chose cannabis over football. And it may be just possible the way the league shapes these rules, and had it happened during his time, he could have continued to be a superstar level football player. And
do you ever think about that though? Like what he gave up because he loved to smoke weed. To me, you want to talk about a statement, like a real statement in favor of cannabis. Like Ricky Williams should be held out as like one of the greatest like cannabis pioneers of all time, because that guy walked away from like literally one of the best possible potential careers in front of him in favor of saying, I don't agree with the policy. And I absolutely, from a principled perspective, applaud the guy. And I don't think there's too many guys out there that have the guts to do what he did.
Well, that may be true. And I'll just say, as a guy who lives in Chicago but isn't a Bears fan and has to tolerate it all the time, playing for Mike Ditka could drive anybody crazy. So, I could certainly understand where that might come from. But yeah, right? I mean, and think about how stupid the league is, to take such a mindless stand to the point where they're going to lose one of their marquee players. And now, he's gone out and he's doing his thing. And I'll tell you, Rob, as a lawyer, I can't help but notice that I heard it first before I read it, right? That the name of his company is Heisman. And I thought, oh boy, the Heisman Group is not going to be happy with this, but he spells it Highsman. So I imagine that it's not the same name exactly. But I wonder whether or not the Heisman Group will go and object to it, considering that I'm sure quite a few members of the Heisman Group have from time to time probably partaken in this substance as well.
Well, it might be a good time to introduce our guest, Scott Berman, and get his thoughts on this. Scott, you want to chime in? You obviously know the sports league's probably far better than both Larry and I.
It's a very exciting development. It's about time. I can already tell you what the study's going to say. I can give you guys a preview. It's going to say that cannabis works better than opioids and is much safer. And it's not a performance-enhancing drug. So it's like about time. A lot of these guys, as you said, have been using cannabis for pain management forever. They're just doing it without getting caught. So it should be a lot more accessible. It should be prescribed by the team doctors. I like that you said the Steelers guy is actually really into it. We need the medical professionals to say to the owners, this is going to keep the owners want these players to be healthy and get back on the field if they get a concussion and prolong their careers. And cannabis is a huge development here. I also think it's like with the Ricky Williams thing, I do admire him a lot, Rob. He's really took a stand. He chose his health and he said, this is what I need to do. And now he's an entrepreneur and he was right. And eventually the league will come around to what he said. So it's a great development.
Yeah, I think it is very exciting, and it's always nice when a high-profile player like that is willing to step out and do that. Now, before we dive into a little more talk with Scott about what brings him to our show today, I'm getting frantic signals from my producer that I aired at the beginning here because we have a wonderful Grateful Dead show lined up for us today, and our norm is for me to go ahead and give an introduction of it, and so I'm going to do that really quickly, and then we'll go back to what we were talking about. So on today's show, in addition to chatting with Scott, we are going to be talking about a Grateful Dead show from February 21st, 1995, in Salt Lake City, and this show really interests Rob and I quite a bit, and I'm hoping Scott too. Not only is it a 95 show, so it's Jerry's last year, it's in Salt Lake City, which if you wanted to pick one town and say, is there any one place in America that's probably about as anti-Grateful Dead values as you could find, people might point to Salt Lake City, and yet nevertheless there they are. And so to give everyone a little taste for our show today, we're going to play a little clip from the very opening tune of the Salt Lake City show. And then Rob, who is an attendee at the show, can give us a little background on that as well. Dan, go ahead and spin that for us, would you please?
When young Brigham saw it first, said I seen some nasty desert boy, but this one here's the worst. Lord took out the Brigham, said I got a great idea. I want him out to see, and I think I want him here. That ton of righteousness is fair. Sound like what the hell was your name?
So, Rob, you're in Salt Lake City seeing the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead walk out on stage and sing a song about Salt Lake City that I guess was an old Bob Weir tune, right, from Bobby and the Midnights. And I've heard it a few times on Grateful Dead radio. Do you have a recollection of them ever having played that tune other than that occasion as the Grateful Dead?
I don't. And I can tell you, we were all talking about before the show, they're going to play Salt Lake City while they're here. Just the way you always, hope that they play Truckin' if, they mention your town's name in Truckin' or, in Jack Straw, certain songs that mention, cities in the songs. But did we think they were going to come out and open with it? No. I mean, look, there's a lot of places that I can think of where you live there and you hope that, your favorite band comes to town and, someday it eventually happens. We didn't think there's a chance ever that the Grateful Dead were going to play Salt Lake any more than they go back to New Orleans, right? So when they announced at the end of '94, when they announced the spring tour and the first show of the year, first 3 shows of the year were kind of just a random 3-night run in Salt Lake. That was the biggest news that hit me, and I lived in Salt Lake at that point for 5 years, and we were floored and we were super fired up, and that was one of the most fun 3-night runs I've ever had, partly because, as you know, living in Chicago, when you get to go home and sleep in your own bed after a show, it sure makes it that much more fun. And when you can invite 200 or 300 of your favorite friends to come back with you, it makes it even better.
Well, I mean, but this just cracks me up because, first of all, it's one of those Bobby songs that's out there in the Dead universe that Bobby like bombs away and stuff like that, right? That that he has no trouble singing, but I could never imagine Jerry going along with. And here they are playing this tune, and in Salt Lake City, and I guess it's kind of deferential to Brigham Young and the Mormons, right? He's not really dissing on them or anything. He's just saying that they got here.
Yeah, he is. No, he's poking some fun at him.
Well, maybe a little bit, but not maybe as much as like South Park, right? So, but he's up there. What was there? The crowd obviously had a great, wonderful reaction to it. Was that genuinely felt, or were the newspapers the next day, proclaiming the end of the universe?
No, here's the thing, and this is an interesting one. The security to get into the Delta Center was so bad and the lines were so long that the arena was probably half empty when Salt Lake City came on. And when people came in and said what they opened with, people like Salt Lake City, I was like, crap, I missed it. Like half the people I know missed the opener that night. Half the people I know missed the first 2 or 3 songs. It was, as you can imagine, with you take that much like rampant drug use in a crowd and combine that with the Salt Lake City Police Department that's never faced off against anything like this before. They're doing everything they could just to move people through while still searching absolutely everyone in a way that they went through everything.
Had the Dead ever played there before?
They played Park West in 1987.
I remember that, right up on the side of a hill.
Yeah, which is now the Canyons. But they played Park West. They played, I want to say they might have played Park West in '83 as well. But no, I mean, had they ever played in Salt Lake? I think the last time they played Salt Lake was probably in the very early '70s. But from like the time they started playing the sheds and not theaters anymore, nope, nothing.
Wow. Okay, well, we will get back to that show in a few minutes. As you can tell, it's one that's going to have a lot of good talk about it, and we look forward to it. But let's get to our guest, Scott Berman. And Scott, welcome to the Deadhead Cannabis Show. We appreciate you taking some time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us about Panther Opportunity Fund. What is it? What did you do? How do you get it started? And all of that.
Sure. So we've been investing in cannabis for about 8 years. The Panther Fund was our second fund. We're now on our third. We've invested in about 40 companies across about 22 different sectors of the cannabis space. So we invest a lot in the ancillary businesses, the picks and shovels. We also invest in grows and retailers and brands. So we look to be diversified in the space.
Who are the we?
My partners are Jordan Tritt and Ramey Tritt and David Friedman. They're
Sure, I know Dave.
Yep, you might know some of them. And Jordan, Ramey Tritt was my first mentor in the space for venture capital. He actually invested in I had a startup in California in 2014 and 15. It did distribution. Ramey was an investor in our deal. And so when I got involved in investing in cannabis, I called him and I got into the fund in 2017.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
And where is it at today, and what are you guys doing with it right now?
So the Panther Opportunity Fund is fully deployed into about 16 companies. So we're about 4 years in. I'd say 15 of the companies are doing really well. We have some home runs, we have some singles and doubles. And so we created our third fund, which is called the Panther Micro Fund. We've raised some money into that, and now we're deploying into new deals now.
Okay. And are the deals that you invest in, number one, primarily in the United States, and number two, any particular part of the United States?
They're almost all in the United States as of now. We will look overseas, but we prefer U.S. It's interesting with the geo question. If it's an ancillary business, it's usually all over. It's like fintech or advertising, and then it's really not related to the geography. If it's a grow operation or retail, then we focus on what's happening in that area. So years ago, we invested in Oregon and California. And did some things out west in Washington. Now we're looking at Maine and Michigan and Illinois and some of the newer adult use markets. I'm actually super focused on New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and PA. And that's really going to be a big focus for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, which companies have been your home runs? Have you had any big exits already, or any of yours, kind of the first wave of the bigger U.S. publics?
So one of the home runs we have is a company called Pathogen DX. They're a diagnostic lab testing company. And we actually like companies that can do business inside cannabis, but also in other verticals. And they actually developed a COVID testing kit. So they started off doing marijuana testing for labs and selling kits. And now they're doing diagnostic testing for COVID. So they've been quite busy the last year and a half. So they're doing extremely well. Another one is BDSA Analytics. You may be familiar. They're one of the leaders in industry-wide analytics. We have another one called Philo, which is part of what I like to do is digital ad tech, and they're doing really well in the advertising space.
Very exciting. Okay. Now, you're from Philadelphia originally?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so how does a kid from Philly get caught up in, the big-time marijuana financing business?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually, prior to this, I co-founded an advertising business here in Philly, and we specialized in politics and healthcare, and we did data-driven digital marketing. And so I got really involved in politics for many years, and there was a lot of different political issues that we worked on for advertising, and I was very proud to bring in the cannabis client one day. And my partner's like, what, weed politics? I'm like, trust me on this one. Weed politics is getting very interesting. So we actually were working for the Marijuana Policy Project, running ads in Alaska. Vote yes on cannabis in 2014. It was on the ballot and it passed.
With Rob Campia.
Yes, Rob was my guy, man. Rob was very influential in the early days for me because not only did he give me business, for this advertising, but I just would sit with him and be like, what's next? And I remember right after the 2014 cycle, I went down to DC and met with Rob, and he said, it's all about California in 2016. That's what we're, it's the whole thing, and it's going to tip over the whole country. So I immediately went out to Cali and started to investigate more of the space in anticipation of the adult use market. So a lot of my thesis revolves around politics and what's happening in what part of the country and when.
So my preamble on LA County then resonates with you because you've obviously watched it on a county-by-county basis and city-by-city basis, and you understand the great misnomer that California is the single biggest adult use market, but at the same time is one of the most restrictive adult use markets. It isn't truly a free market state. It's completely dependent on where you actually live in the state.
So when you were talking about that, I had some flashbacks of we started a distribution business called Calyx Brands in Oakland back then, and it was really hard to figure out where we could take weed and where we couldn't. And we would even drive through a county, and if our driver got pulled over, they might go to jail, and then the next county over, they would be legally dropping off cannabis. So it's the regulatory framework has been screwy from the beginning. We know that the taxes are a major problem, so it's encouraging what you mentioned, Rob, that they're trying to fix it and putting in more people and expanding. I still think it's got a long way to go, though.
It does. And Gavin Newsom's trying, because at this point he's realizing that there's about to be a massive extinction event with California-based businesses if they don't figure this out. So it's we'll see. I mean, there has to be some sort of an abatement in the tax policy, but if there's not, right now you've got an oversaturation in the supply of California, and look, every state has their own issues. Every state's got their own nuance. Pennsylvania, you're watching Governor Wolf, drag his feet, even though you've got John Fetterman that's screaming from the rooftops to legalize cannabis. So it's it's completely dependent where you are. Obviously, in Illinois, we're watching Pritzker have to pick up the reins from someone that wasn't nearly as pro cannabis.
The interesting thing about PA also is we're now going to be surrounded by adult use very soon. So New Jersey's going to be lighting up soon. New York will be next year. Connecticut will probably be this year. And so PA and Maryland is also going to put it on the ballot in November, hopefully. So, they really got to get it together in Harrisburg, because we're going to be left behind and we're going to lose a lot of revenue.
Yeah, it's not that far to go across the border to Trenton.
Right. When you're up in the East Coast corridor there, you can really get around pretty easily, I would imagine. So
yeah, it's one big blob. This whole it's a one big economy. 30 million people in this area, and it's very, the borders don't matter that much.
And I think a lot of America forgets that Philly is the 5th biggest city in America.
Yes.
This isn't a small city. It's kind of overshadowed by its neighbor to the north. But anywhere else in any other state, it would be the biggest city in a region, not just in that state. So that's a huge driver, an economic impact driver.
And what's your sense of the overall,
Yes.
mood in Pennsylvania towards where that's going to go?
Well, the medical market is actually doing really well here. They did something interesting about 2 years ago. They added anxiety as a potential medical condition, and all of a sudden the patient count went way up, and they ran out of weed a couple weeks later in the stores, which was interesting. But so, the medical program is doing really well, and so there's a lot of support to flip it to adult use. Unfortunately, there's about 10 senators in Harrisburg that have been pushing against it for so long, and so I think a lot of people want it to happen, but there's still this blockade happening.
Is that just like an opposition on principle, a kind of a moral opposition, or do they have reasons why?
I think it's an age issue, Larry, most of the time. It's older politicians who are out of touch, who don't believe in cannabis as medicine for sure, and they still think it's going to cause all sorts of problems, and they're not well informed. You mentioned Fetterman. I mean, he's really an advocate, and he talks about, I really like what he says about cannabis, because he speaks the truth. He's trying to educate people and trying to, help the state. It's also a financial driver too. So
Is he going to win his Senate race?
that's a great question. I really wish I know. I don't want to really get political, but it's a little scary on the Republican side. So I hope Fetterman does well.
He's running for, Toomey's retiring, right? He's running for Toomey's spot?
Toomey's retiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about Shapiro? Is he going to win the governor's seat?
Yes, I like Josh Shapiro a lot, and I hope he becomes governor. And the other guy running against Fetterman right now is Dr. Oz, which I can't figure that out either.
Yeah. I know. Well, I think it's a nice blow to Oz. They wouldn't let him run on the ballot as Dr. Oz. It's got to be, his first name Ahmed, I think, on the ballot, which he's claiming is some sort of like racism. And I'm like, that's your name, man. Like, you can't run on just name recognition. You need to run on who you actually are.
It's going to be close either way. We have a very divided state. I mean, if you remember in the presidential cycle, it came down to a couple counties and things like that. So I think the Senate race is going to be tight either way.
Yeah, I think so too. But either way, I think if Shapiro gets it, cannabis still goes through even without Wolf. I'm not sure, who he's running against on the Republican side, but we'll see. But I certainly think that Pennsylvania all signs are pointing towards adult use.
Now, Scott, I know we're the Deadhead Cannabis Show, and we typically keep our conversation to that, but you have a very unique night job, I guess you would say. Unlike in the Jerry Garcia song, you have both. So tell us a little bit about this night gig you have with the local NBA basketball team there.
Yeah, sure. I keep stats for the Philadelphia 76ers. Been doing it since about 1988. Just keeping every number and every statistic during the game on a computer. I love basketball. I love the Sixers. So it's a very enjoyable thing for me.
How did you come to have that job?
So my father was the shot clock timer in the 60s and 70s. And he was at the game where Wilt scored 100 points. And, he's been around forever. Yeah. So when I was a little kid, 10, 12 years old, he would bring me to the games and I would keep score. He would hand me the program and I would just keep the stats for fun. And then I got out of college and they said, "You want to work?" And I'm like, "You're going to pay me for this?" "Sure, I'll do it," And Worked a lot of college hoops. You mentioned Villanova. I worked at Villanova, or someone mentioned Villanova. Anyway, I worked there in Temple and LaSalle, and so a lot of Philly hoops over the years, and I've been very privileged to be part of the scene.
Well, that's what is it called there? The Little Five,
Big Five.
Big Five, the Big Five, the city schools.
City
Right, I
schools,
couldn't remember
big-
what it. Right, but yeah, I mean that's a hotbed of basketball in the world, Philadelphia. I mean,
Yeah.
but you were post Dr. J.
Yes, I started working there post Dr. J, right at the end of his career, actually.
And right before we started, I happened as a big Bulls fan mentioned to you that the oddity for the Chicago Bulls historians is that Michael Jordan scored his 5,000th career point, his 10,000th career point, and his 15,000th career point, all in the Spectrum.
Yes, and I had the honor of recording those points on a computer.
That's amazing. Now, did you ever have like Charles Barkley or somebody get in your face demanding an extra rebound?
So, you know what's so funny about it? I'm not even going to mention the player, but literally last week someone called upstairs and said there was an assist that, you didn't give me an assist. Like the player had the PR guy call us and say we robbed him of an assist. And we were like, every play that we do is reviewed by the NBA, so we sort of say it's not our fault. But yeah, that happens a lot. These guys pay a lot of attention to their stats.
I bet they do. A lot of them have bonuses that are contingent on their stats, right? So they need to get that done. Wow. Well, that's very cool too. And you're also a Deadhead.
Yes, absolutely.
And how long have you been a fan of the Grateful Dead?
I'd say definitely the 80s. I'm trying to remember the first, probably 85, 86 was the first time I saw the Dead. I saw the Dead in 89 at their last show at JFK Stadium, which was awesome. And also the show that you guys picked out, I think I saw them a couple weeks later at the Spectrum in 95. I think that was the last time I saw Jerry. I was looking it up. So yeah, I've been... I've been going for a long time. I actually wish I had gone to more shows back in those days. I didn't travel that much, and I should have. Now I travel more to see shows than I did when I was a teenager.
Are you going around to see a lot of Dead and Company shows?
Yeah, I saw Dead and Company in Philly in July. I actually preferred J-Rad, and I saw them last week in Philly, and I go to festivals to see J-Rad, and I see them out in New York at the Cap Theater, and I see Dark Star quite a bit at festivals too. So I'm definitely into all of them. I have my favorites, but I'll see pretty much any of those when they're around.
So my claim to fame of the Philadelphia Spectrum, Scott, is on March 18th, 1992. It's the first time I got arrested at a Grateful Dead show. Nice. So the Spectrum has hold fond memories of that place. We'd broken into the press box that sits way above the top of the Spectrum. You got to walk the stairs up from the top row, and somehow someone left the gate open to that, and they also left the fridge open with all the beer in there, and we drank all the network's beer, and we were playing the show over a telephone and dangling into the crowd. And the first night, there's only about 6 of us that went in there. The next night, about 20 of us went in there. The third night, it was just an all-out party in this joint. And about 40 of Philly's finest came in to escort us out.
Oh my God.
So that was
that's hilarious.
I don't know if you remember that 1992 run. It was a cold 3-night run, and they wouldn't even let us gather our clothes or shoes or anything. And we just got walked out of that place barefoot, no shirts, and
oh my God.
and loaded right in the paddy wagon. So thank you to Philly for that. I still made it back though for many other shows. Are you an Electric Factory guy then?
Yeah. Yep, I've gone there a bunch of times, absolutely. We have a lot of good venues now. We actually have Ardmore Music Hall now, too, which is right near my neighborhood. And they have a lot of Dead-type shows. They frequently put like a group of guys together. A couple guys from Dark Star, a couple guys from here and there. John Kadlicik and those guys. And they come in and they do like a super group and they play the Dead. In fact, one thing happened last year. I met Wavy Gravy in Ardmore Music Hall. They had a Wavy Gravy birthday party. And he was there, and it was like, maybe it was a couple years ago, but...
Shout out to Hugh Romney.
Yeah, it was so cool. And they brought all sorts of really good people up, and they played an awesome Dead set. I've seen Melvin Seals and JGB there a few times. So there's a lot of good...
What about Bisco? You a hometown fan of the Disco Biscuits?
Oh, yeah. Mark Brownstein's a really good dude. He's a friend of mine, and he plays a lot of Dead stuff, too. actually there. They're really good. Yep.
Yeah, they're cannabis guys. Him and Magner were looking at putting a business together for a little while.
Yes. I've talked to them about it. Yes, they're definitely into the weed space.
Now, did you say, do you ever go out to Derby to the Tower Theater?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been there. I'm trying to remember what Dead show I saw there. I can't remember at the minute, but I was there for something like a couple months ago, but I forget. I'll think of it.
The only time I always wanted to see a show on the Spectrum, one of my all-time favorite shows, which is actually coming up on the calendar, so we might be talking about it very soon, is April 6th, 82 from the Spectrum. I think it's the best shakedown street I've ever heard. And it's it was right before I saw my first Dead show. A bunch of my buddies were at that show, and I wound up with a tape of it that I listened to over and over and over. The Dead finally released it. I always said, I got to go to Philly and see a show on the Spectrum. Never made it for that, but in 84 I went there on the spring tour, and they were actually playing at the Philly Civic Center.
Whoa.
And so we saw 3 shows there. And it was an interesting place to see them.
Yeah.
We liked it a lot. In fact, one of them was just released recently as a Dave's Pick selection. But we had a great time in Philly. I also, my other big Philly memory was in 81. A group of us drove from Ann Arbor out to Philly to see the first show of the Rolling Stones tour that year at JFK Stadium. They opened the entire tour there, I think, with I want to say Journey and Rob Thorogood and the George Thorogood and the Delaware Destroyers. And for a few of us, it was the first time we tried psychedelics, and it was quite the afternoon. And I had a very fond memory of sitting out in that stadium on a beautiful day, watching the Rolling Stones and really enjoying it and thinking, my God, these guys sound so old. I can't believe it. And of course, it's 40 years later, and Mick Jagger still runs around the stage like he's a kid. So God bless them, whatever they're doing and doing right.
So Larry, that day was a very transformative day. I was 14 years old, and I've convinced my parents to let me go to the Stone show because it would be their last tour ever. Like, Mom, you got to let me go. And of course, this is before cell phones or whatever. She dropped me off. I went in, and I was blown away. And that was like a live music indoctrination for me.
Yeah.
That day, it was amazing.
Yeah, me too. It was the first time I'd ever seen the Rolling Stones, and I was very, very excited about that. And yeah, it was right up there like the first time I saw the Who. And you realize these are really these are the giants of rock and roll. REO Speedwagon in Boston are a lot of fun, but these are the guys that make it all happen. And just an incredible town, great shows, and a really great place. Very cool. Very cool.
So it's funny you mentioned the March 18th Spectrum show in '95, because the thing that's got in common with the show we're listening to from Salt Lake today is, if you ask sort of fans what the 2 best versions of Visions of Johanna were that the Grateful Dead played, the ones that come in 1 and 2 are The Last Time You Saw Jerry Play, which is the late March '95, and the Salt Lake City show that we're listening to. And I would go back and forth and try to say I'm not sure which one is better. They're both near flawless. I'm partial to the one at the Delta Center simply because the Delta Center was the first one they played it since 1986, and it was just such a surprise, along with a lot of the other stuff they played during that show. I mean, Salt Lake City was a surprise. That Would Be Something, I Just Want to Make Love to You, and Visions were all songs you did not expect to see in a set list at that time. I don't know, Dan. I don't know if do you have any of that the Visions that we can listen to?
She makes it all too concise and too clear that Johanna's not here. The ghost of electricity out in the bones of a fade with these visions of joy. Now taking my praise.
It's a great tune. I was lucky enough to catch it a few times back when they were first playing it, and then after they brought it back. And when Jerry could remember the lyrics, it's just a beautiful tune. And even when he couldn't, he plays it really nicely anyway. So that's a great song.
That night, I remember, there's certain memories that stick out in your mind of where you were and what was happening at that moment. But the morning of that show, I just had an ounce of sassafras delivered to my house. And this is sort of predating the Molly days, and this is like when sassafras was by far the best ecstasy you could get in powder form. And I spent the entire lunch that day packing gel caps, getting them ready for the show, a little 1/5 of a gram, gel caps, and an ounce was a fair amount. 5 to a gram. You're talking. It was a chunk of ecstasy, and like everyone I was with took like 2 or 3 of these things, and we were hanging out. Because Visions came out of space, we were hanging out in the sort of rotunda area in the hallways. Waiting for space to be over, playing video games. Like they just had like a couple of video. We were playing like I don't know, whatever the NBA game is that was really big at the time. And we started hearing it sort of fade in. We're trying to figure out like what are they coming out with. And it wasn't until like as soon as they started like going into the notes for like 4 or 5 seconds before Jerry started singing, that someone I was with is like, that's Visions of Johanna, and we're all like, no way. He's like, no, that's Visions of Johanna. We just dropped what we were doing, and we were so high out of our minds at that point. Like, it was like just like peak performance, like high on ecstasy, that running in and boom, just like catching like just one of the greatest breakouts, at least of all the breakouts that I saw. I would put that up there as like top 3 for me of the ones that like were most impactful. Of just so soulful, so perfect, so unexpected, so clean. The licks on that were just pure fire. Every time I hear that song, it brings me back to that moment of time of sort of being in the Delta Center, going like, "Wait, what?" and just sprinting to get back towards where our seats were. But just amazing.
Which is the version on from the Phil Zone?
That's the Philly one, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because the Philly one, he nails all the words. The one in Salt Lake, he flubs the words on the on the. You can hear the night watchman clicking his flashlight and asking himself if it's him. It's insane. Like the whole D Train line, he flubs the words on. He flubs the words a little bit on the back of the fish truck that lows while your conscience explodes part. But the rest of it, musically, I would say the Salt Lake City one is the better version. It's so clean. It's just like his licks are perfect.
And as much fun, and I don't know about you, Scott, but Rob and I talk about this all the time, that, people say, man, but Jerry forgets the words. You're like, but that's part of the fun. It's kind of what makes him human. And, adds, I remember this version, he forgot the words here, or that version.
Yes and no, though. Yes and no, because he had a teleprompter for this. Right? If you got a teleprompter, how do you forget words when you're reading a teleprompter?
Well, I was just going to say, he had a teleprompter in 95?
He had a teleprompter for that Visions. The first shows in 95 were the first time we'd ever seen him have a teleprompter before. And we figured part of the reason he played Visions that night is like, okay, I can now play songs I couldn't remember the words to previously, that now I can actually nail them. So he had a teleprompter for Visions, and that was the one thing where really? How are you blowing this? Now, having said that, he only missed a couple lines, and at the time, I think I told you earlier via email, Larry, that I didn't know all the words to Visions, and it wasn't until after I heard that version that was what prompted me to get on the internet for the first time ever. I'd asked someone, hey, come to the library at the University of Utah, show me how to get on the internet, because I want to see if I can look up what the actual real words are to Visions of Johanna, because I had the tape of the show an hour after the show, and I was listening to it over and over and over again, trying to piece together what some of those words were. So if I can thank anyone for getting me on the World Wide Web, it's Garcia and Bob Dylan to look up the lyrics of Visions of Johanna.
That's funny. Well, look, I've said it a lot of times. Jerry Garcia singing Bob Dylan is what really turned me on to Bob Dylan. I like Bob Dylan, but, Blowing in the Wind and a few songs that we all knew. And it took me to the albums that these songs were on, which then it turned me on to all those albums, and really pulled me into Dylan all the way altogether. And this, if you're gonna sing Dylan tunes, this is about as good as it gets.
And you think of his poetry, and you think, okay, there's certain lines. There's 4 or 5 gems that come out of this song. Whether it's the Mona Lisa must have the highway blues, you can tell by the way she smiles, or the line we just played, which is the ghost of electricity is housed in the bones of her face. Those are beautiful lines, like the skeleton keys in the rain line. There's certain things where only Dylan can evoke things that make you think that way, and Visions just nails it.
Right, like Louise and her lover so entwined in the Visions of Johanna, they conquer my mind. It's right. It's really, it's amazing stuff, and Jerry really sang it really well. He had the voice where he could kind of add that emotional edge to it, and it was a lot of fun. Were you a big Dylan fan, Scott?
Not as much. In fact, I liked, and what I thought was when the Dead did something from Dylan, I always liked the Dead version better.
So did Dylan.
Right.
And I respect Dylan, and one of the most amazing songwriters we've ever had. But I've seen Dylan shows actually. But no, I like when the Dead does those covers and adds some flavor to them.
So, speaking of covers, this show is so great that we even actually have a second clip right now that we're going to cue up here in a minute. And I have to say and confess that this is all part of my musical maturation process, because sometime in mid-'85 or '86, I think they played it for the first time at Ventura, I recall. and the song is I Just Want to Make Love to You, which of course is a number that's been around forever. But my immediate association with it at that time was Foghat. Foghat was like this band that I loved and I listened to all the time, and they had
Slow Ride.
yeah, they had the live album with just great versions of Fool for the City and everything, and it was one of the first live albums that really got me hooked on live music. And I'm thinking, why are the Grateful Dead covering Foghat? And of course, as soon as I asked some Deadhead, and they looked at me like, what the fuck are you talking about, kid? And I was like, okay, lesson learned. But I will confess that here we are 40, 50 years later, and I hear that. It still makes me think of Foghat, but go ahead and play it.
Who was the original? Was it Muddy Waters?
I don't even, by the time we get back, I'm going to have an answer to that.
I don't want you, be no stray. I don't want you, well, I don't want you, set free. I just want to make love to you, make love to you, love to you, love to you, love.
Willie Dixon.
There we go. So Willie Dixon also is a Little Red Rooster, right?
Yeah, he's got a few of them in the repertoire that they've delved into from time to time. But
I was going to guess Chuck Berry, but I'm glad you told me.
to hear Jerry and the boys play that, whatever, it's just fun for me. I must confess that one of the great things I like about jam bands, and we've talked about this before as well, is all the great covers that they'll do. And so we talk about the Dead and covering Dylan and the Beatles and so many great things like that. And then they cover a tune like this, and Fish does it too. I have to say, Rob, I was Scott, are you a Fish fan?
Not nearly as much as the Dead, but I like Fish.
I'm probably in your camp. I've seen them a handful of times. I do enjoy them, but I
love Trey.
Yes.
Trey by himself, Trey Band, and Oysterhead. I I like that a lot.
Yep.
Bringing out the Oysterhead. I love it.
Yeah. But the other day I'm driving home and they're playing a Fish show from '93, and I hear the intro to this song and I start going crazy because nobody in the audience is saying a thing because the song clearly outdates all of them. But it was, I forgot who recorded it. Was it Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show on the cover of the Rolling Stone?
Yeah, that coincided with when they got the cover of the Rolling Stone. They played that. I don't know if you know the story behind it, but they were going to be on the cover of Rolling Stone the next week, and so they played that song as an homage to the fact that they knew the magazine was coming out a couple days later.
Oh, see now, I didn't know the story. But I'm not enough of a fish head to know that, but I hear that, and it just in my brain all of a sudden explodes. I'm like, come on. This is like one of those songs we all sang when we were in 5th grade and we tried to learn all the lyrics to or whatever. And now here's Fish, years later, it's already years later, playing it. So, but the covers are just a fantastic part of it. And on our way out tonight, in a few minutes, we have yet another cover that the Dead played at this show, which is a great version of Broken Arrow. And I love Robbie Robertson and love the fact that that was a song that not only that they covered but that they let Phil cover.
So Larry, the J-Rad encore the other night was Dear Prudence.
Oh.
When Jerry Band did Dear Prudence, I just think it's amazing. The jam in the back half of that song is incredible. So I was happy to see J-Rad do it the other night.
That's great to know. And I have to tell you that other than like in October when I got to see Phil play with the quintet at the Cap for 3 nights, and to me that's as good as Grateful Dead music and jam band music gets. If they're not going to do it, but J-Rad to me otherwise is far and away the best Dead cover band out there, and I base it entirely. And maybe this isn't fair, but I think it's very crucial if you're going to be a Dead cover band. They play the 11 the way the Grateful Dead played the 11 in '69. Much better than like Bobby's current versions of it and everything, and even Phil screwing around with it. But back then, boy, that's and J-Rad just nails it. They've got the voices in and out, and the guitars, and I just couldn't have been more impressed. And after I heard that, I was on board with them.
And Larry, as I was saying to you, it's kind of the same thing you just said about not knowing who made the cover initially. Like with Broken Arrow, it wasn't until today I'd always thought it was a Rod Stewart tune that Robbie Robertson had covered. I knew it from the Robbie Robertson album. For some reason in my head, I had it that Rod Stewart predated his version, and I figured that Robertson on his debut album in '87, first thing he did sort of post band, was covering Stewart. And it wasn't until today that I realized it was the other way around.
There you go, right? The wonderful musical world. We're always learning something new, and it can change your perspective on things a little bit. But one other thing about this show that I want to touch on, because there's just so many great songs in this show. If we really had, enough time to go through all of it, one of the songs I had thought about featuring was "Samba in the Rain." Right, and "Samba in the Rain" was a kind of a fun tune for me. I think it gave Vince kind of a little bit of footing in the band, and gave him a chance to really get up there and have some fun with it. And I was listening to the version of it earlier, and that sounded like that was a really solid version of it. They're having a good time up there playing, and it was great to see. What are your recollections of that, Rob?
So I actually went back and listened to that samba today, and look, I wouldn't say it was one of my favorite songs, but I think it's one of the songs that had they played it longer. Had a chance to play it for a couple of years. I probably would have liked samba more because it's actually got like a good samba beat to it. It's got a good sort of like Latin dance beat. There's a lot to be said about that. It's just I had a tough time with Vinny's like high end pitch when he sang a lot of tunes. That was great as a harmonizer, but as a lead, there's very few songs I really liked Vinny taking the lead on. But that's just personal preference. Like musically, I think that it's a lot of fun.
And the other thing about this show that has to be mentioned, because this is 95 already, so it's not like this is the first time they're playing it. You got to first set so many roads.
I think most of them were first sets back then. I'd say more so many roads than not were first setters.
I remember them in the second set, but either way, to get that plus a Visions of Johanna, to get two.
That's the great part about it, is it's rare when you get like two great ballads where you get one in the first set, one in the second set. It's like you never, once in a while, Birdsong was kind of like, the great Jerry ballad you get in the first set, but it's rare that you get, something like where you get so many in a Standing on the Moon or a Morning Dew in the same show.
Exactly. And, the other thing that I guess is just worth noting, and at the risk of offending any of our younger listeners out there, and maybe anybody else even who's on our podcast right now with us, one of the things about 95 shows that used to drive me crazy, and this is just my own personal thing, is you sit there and you see just an absolutely amazing show like that with a tremendous Sugar Magnolia closer. Everything you want. And then they come out and they give you a Liberty encore. And I'm sorry, I just was never a fan of Liberty. I never bought into it. I go to shows now and kids are like, God, I hope he plays Liberty. I love Liberty. Liberty is so great. And I'm like, am I old fashioned? Am I just missing the boat on this one? Phil obviously likes it because he plays it all the time. He can't get enough of it. Am I missing the boat on this, Rob? Is there something going on with that tune that I'm just not seeing?
Look, it's if you're into like rebellion and your sort of mantra is "Don't tell me what to do," it's a true libertarian song. If Robert Hunter said, define libertarianism, liberty is the embodiment of kind of that ethos, right? So for that reason, is it cool? It's a rebel song. Other than that, I'm not a fan of Liberty either. It's as much of a throwaway encore as I Fought the Law was to me. I heard Liberty. I was going to the parking lot, getting my cooler, and getting ready to sell beer. Right. So.
But at least I Fought the Law was another good cover, though.
Yeah, sure. But I definitely not one of my favorites. But it's a good excuse to make my way to the door and get good position in the lot to start making money as soon as the show ended.
Yeah, but you see, that's the killer too, right? Because then you never know. Ever since Scott hasn't heard this story, a lot of people have. The night of my rehearsal dinner for my wedding in 1988, September 3rd, the Dead did their live version of Ripple. Electric Ripple at the Cap Center, and all these buddies of mine missed it because they were at my wedding, and a lot of people who were at the show missed it because it was a second encore, and they all went running out. Whether the first encore was US Blues or whatever, and they're like, I got to go out and get set up in the parking lot, and then nobody else came out, and then they tried to figure out what's going on, and they heard. After that, I'm like, I will never.
Better than Liberty.
Even the very last show, right? The very last Dead show. They Black Muddy Rivers, the encore, and we were all like, really? This is the end of the tour? And Phil saves the day with a box of rain, But
you should always know Chicago is always a double encore on the final night of summer tour. Always. In 91, 93, and 95, you got a double encore. I walked out on Lucia Sky with Diamonds like the second time they played it. Where I just walked out the door, I was like, ah! The security's like, nope. Sorry.
Not going back in, right? No, you're done. And then they laugh and they think it's funny because you're outside melting down. And, they're inside doing their thing and everything. So it's crazy. Scott, before we go, thank you again so much for joining us. How can listeners reach out to you and get in touch with you if they're interested in what you're doing and want to talk?
So the-panther-group.co is our website. We're actually super easy to find on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I'm easy to reach anywhere. Reach out. I love talking to people about the space or music. So, I'm easy to find and happy to chat.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. We appreciate your insight and your contributions to the Grateful Dead conversation. Always appreciate it. Please give my best to David the next time you talk to him. And we'll continue to watch you guys and hopefully have you back in the future.
Appreciate it very much, guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Rob, what are your farewell thoughts here today?
Not much more than, thanks so much, Scott Berman, for coming in. My best to David Friedman as well and the rest of your crew. And super fired up to see you in Southern California next week, Larry.
Yeah, looking forward to coming out there. Hopefully have a chance to see you. And we just found out that my buddy who's going to be out there with us, my friend Alex, we're always talking about on the show with Jay last week and everything. Alex was able to score 6 tickets for us to see the Eddie Vedder show down in the San Diego area that Sunday night, the 27th. So very, very excited about that. I like Pearl Jam, a big Eddie Vedder fan. So, if you're going to be out in California, you have to see at least one outdoor music show, or else, kind of what's the point, right? So, we will look forward to touching base with you when we're out there next week, though. And touching base with all the fans again in a week. Everybody have a great week. On our way out, please listen to Broken Arrow, is sung by Phil Lesh on February 21st, 1995 at the Delta Center in Salt Lake City. And otherwise, we'll talk to you next week. And everybody enjoy your cannabis responsibly.
Who else is gonna bring you a broken arrow? Who else is gonna bring you a bottle of rain? There you go. Moving across the water. There you go. Turning my whole world around.
I'm Joy Beckerman, and I'd like to invite you to join me with my hemp industry leading guests on Hemp Baron. During my over a quarter century at the forefront of the hemp movement and emerging hemp economy, I've had the privilege of working with many of the world's most dynamic, innovative, trailblazing hemp pioneers. And now, every week, I have the honor of speaking with them and sharing their stories with you on Hemp Baron. You can download the latest episode every Wednesday at mjbulls.com or from wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, y'all. I'm Jo, host of Casually Baked, the podcast. If you're curious to explore the highly responsible side of cannabis, farming, and legalization, I'm here to help lighten the stigma and build your canna confidence. Download episodes now of Casually Baked, the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And journey with me through the evolving cannabis culture and discover how and why people like you are adding cannabis to their wellness toolkit. It's time to get casually baked.